My name is Elena Brooks. There's a quiet sort of hurt that settles in when you're the child who's never really seen. It's not loud, it doesn't scream for attention, but it lingers in the small things. Like when your father spends every Sunday with Tyler, his real son, but forgets to call you on your birthday. Like when Tyler's laughter fills the room, and your silence is swallowed up by it. I remember those moments. They were small, but they piled up over the years. I wasn't loud like Tyler. I didn't demand the spotlight. And that's what made me invisible. The whole world seemed to spin around his chaos, and I was just there, quietly watching, knowing that no matter how much I tried to be enough, I would always come second. Dad always said I was his quiet daughter, as if that should have been a compliment. Maybe he thought I was just content, happy to stay in the background. But it hurt. I wasn't content. I was longing for something I couldn't put into words. All I wanted was for him to see me, to love me the same way he loved Tyler, the way he loved the noise and the trouble Tyler brought into his life. But it never came. And that was the moment I started shutting down, building walls around a heart that once believed that maybe, just maybe, I could be enough. The truth was, I didn't even know who I was to him anymore. Was I just the daughter who showed up for holidays? The one who quietly accepted being forgotten? All I knew for sure was that I would always be second to Tyler, and I wasn't even sure if Dad cared enough to notice the difference. It started slowly. One day, I realized that I had stopped getting birthday cards from him. I was 18, and the messages that once arrived every year, the half-hearted "Happy Birthday, Elena," scribbled in his shaky handwriting, just stopped. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he was busy. But then I graduated college and I waited for him to show up. He didn't. It wasn't that I needed him there. I didn't expect him to shower me with praise, but a phone call, a simple "I'm proud of you," would have meant the world. But the silence was louder than anything he could have said. I realized then that my father wasn't just absent. He was choosing not to be a part of my life. I was the daughter who was good enough to visit once a year for a holiday dinner, but not good enough to share a milestone with. So I stopped reaching out. I stopped waiting. Each missed call, each unspoken word, carved another piece of myself away. But I didn't cry about it. That would have been too raw, too revealing. Instead, I did what I'd always done. I stayed quiet. I stayed away. The wee ache was familiar now, something that had woven itself so deep into the fabric of my life that I almost didn't notice it anymore. I buried it. And over time, I learned how to live without him. I built a life where he didn't exist, and though I wanted him to notice, I never once asked him to. Maybe I was afraid that if I did, I'd hear what I already knew, that I wasn't worth fighting for, in the silence. I grew. But with every year that passed, it became clearer. He didn't miss me. He just didn't need me. And I was learning to survive without him. I should have known. I should have seen it coming. But you don't expect betrayal to come from the one person who's supposed to protect you, your father. The reading of my grandfather's will was supposed to be a moment of closure, of honoring his legacy. I expected something. Not much, maybe, but something. He was my grandfather after all, and I was his only biological granddaughter. So I sat there, trying to keep my composure, waiting to hear what I would receive. A house, a few shares of the family business, a small inheritance, something to acknowledge the years I spent being the quiet daughter. But then the lawyer read the will, and my stomach dropped. Tyler. Tyler got everything. The 3 restaurants, the vacation cabin, the house, every single asset that my grandfather had built up, the empire that had taken him a lifetime to create. all went to Tyler. Not a single penny for me. Not even a letter. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment, everything went silent around me. I looked at my father, sitting there with a smug look on his face, knowing full well what he'd done. He'd manipulated the will before the final notarization. He'd changed everything to ensure that Tyler would get it all. It was as if I didn't even exist. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just sat there, feeling the weight of that cold, final betrayal press against my ribs. It wasn't the loss of money or property that stung the most. It was the fact that my father had, once again, chosen Tyler. He had made sure that the one thing my grandfather left behind was taken from me. I wasn't even a thought, and that hurt more than anything, but I didn't show it, not in front of them. I just smiled politely, nodded, and left. And as I walked out of that room, I promised myself I would never let him hurt me like that again. I'd find a way to make him regret this, not out of anger, but out of something colder, something quieter, something more dangerous. I left. I didn't look back. And for the first time in my life, I felt something shift deep inside me. A quiet resolve to never again let my father or anyone make me feel small. I moved out of state, far enough away that I wouldn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't contact my father, didn't try to reconnect. What was the point? The last connection I had with him had been severed by a betrayal so deep that no words could undo it. I threw myself into building a life that didn't need him. I started my own real estate firm, scraping together every bit of knowledge, every ounce of determination I had to build something that was mine. There was no one to help me, no father to lean on, no rich inheritance to fall back on. It was just me, and I was okay with that. For the first time, I was proud of the life I was creating, because I knew it was all me. No handouts, no shortcuts. I wasn't living in the shadow of anyone else's achievements, but of course, I couldn't escape the reminders of my past. I watched from a distance as my father's life unraveled. The business that Tyler had inherited? It was a mess. Tyler, as expected, was in and out of legal trouble, and my father's once thriving empire was crumbling beneath the weight of his bad decisions. Diane was gone. I guess she'd had enough of his failures, just like I had. And Tyler, well, Tyler was Tyler, always in trouble, always needing someone to fix his problems. But me? I stayed out of it. I didn't send a single "How are you?" card. I didn't offer any advice. I didn't reach out to offer help. I wasn't the one who had abandoned him, and I wouldn't be the one to pick up the pieces. That was his mess to clean up. I had enough of my own to deal with. The years passed. My firm grew. But so did the coldness in my heart, the kind that comes from years of being overlooked and hurt. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. I wasn't waiting for apologies or recognition. I had learned how to stand on my own, and I didn't need him or anyone else to validate me. The girl who had been forgotten was no longer so easy to ignore. I never expected to buy a piece of my past. Honestly, I didn't even think I wanted to. But fate has a funny way of bringing things full circle, even when you think you've put them behind you. I'd been in the real estate business long enough to know a deal when I saw one. And when a portfolio of struggling businesses came across my desk, I took the opportunity. One of those businesses was the very restaurant chain that my grandfather had built, the one my father had taken from me, the one Tyler had inherited and run into the ground. And now, it was mine. At first, I didn't even know what to feel. Anger? Relief? But as I pored over the details, I realized that this wasn't just a business acquisition. This was my grandfather's legacy, the thing my father had stolen from me, now within my reach. I wasn't just buying a restaurant chain. I was buying back everything that had been taken, not just the properties, but the memories, the history, and the sense of belonging I had been denied. In a strange way, this wasn't just a business move. It was a quiet act of reclamation. I didn't need to shout it from the rooftops or gloat about it. I had already won without even realizing it. The empire that my father had tried to keep from me, the legacy he had altered and bent to fit his narrative, was now in my hands. And as I stood there, looking at the papers, I felt something stir within me, something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the kind that comes with wishing someone would notice you, but the kind that comes with knowing you're in control, knowing that your life is your own, and no one can take that from you. The quiet power that comes with having everything you've worked for, and more. And now, I had it. I knew what I had to do next. This wasn't just about making money or building a bigger empire. This was about something personal. This was about showing my father that I was no longer the daughter he could push aside. This was about taking back what had always been mine. It had been years since I last saw him, and yet when he walked into my office, I recognized him instantly. The man who had once been my father was a shell of the person I remembered. His clothes were disheveled, his face drawn with exhaustion, and his posture slumped in defeat. He looked nothing like the man who had ignored me all those years. Now, he looked smaller, weaker. And for a brief second, I felt something shift inside me. Something I couldn't quite name. Sympathy, pity, but I quickly pushed it away. Dad? My voice was steady, but inside I was fighting a war between what I'd always been taught to feel, love and duty, and the quiet rage that had simmered for so long. He stood there in the doorway, fidgeting with his hands like he was unsure whether to take a step forward. His eyes were desperate, pleading. I could see the years of bad decisions in those eyes. Elena, he said softly, almost as if saying my name was painful. I need your help. It didn't surprise me. After everything he'd done, after all the times he'd turned his back on me, he was here now, desperate. His empire was gone, and he had nowhere else to turn. Diane had left him. Tyler was tangled up in legal trouble again, and my father was lost, standing in front of me with nothing to offer but a broken plea. I was hoping you could give me a small position, just something to get me by. I can't go on like this, Elena. Please. His voice cracked. The man who had once stood tall with pride and arrogance now knelt in front of me. Not literally, but his vulnerability was more powerful than any plea for help. For a moment, I just stared at him. It felt surreal. The father who had ignored me, who had made sure I was erased from the narrative of his life, now asking me for something I had been denied for so long. My hands clenched into fists under the desk, but I didn't speak. Not yet. He was waiting for me to say something, but I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out. Part of me wanted to remind him of all the years he'd abandoned me, the will he'd forged, the betrayal. But I stayed silent. I wasn't angry anymore. Just indifferent. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm, yet sharp with something he couldn't ignore. You left me nothing, Dad, I said, the words tasting like acid in my mouth. Now that I have everything, I'm choosing to do the same. The weight of my words hung in the air between us. His face faltered. His shoulders slumped, even further. I could see the hope draining from him, replaced by the bitter understanding that the man who once controlled everything now had nothing. And that was the point. I had everything now. Everything he had taken from me. And he would never get a chance to take anything else. The silence in the room was deafening, and I could feel his desperation, but I wasn't moved. Not anymore. He stood there, trembling in the doorway, as if waiting for me to soften. for me to step forward and take pity on him. But pity was a luxury I had long stopped offering. Not after everything. His face twisted, like he was trying to come to terms with the reality I had just given him. But the truth was, there was nothing to say. No apology could undo what he had done. No words could erase the years of hurt he had inflicted. And I wasn't looking for closure anymore. I had already found it in the strength I had built all on my own. "I know I messed up," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I never meant for things to go this way." I could feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. All the times I had waited for him to show up. All the moments I had wanted him to notice me, to love me. But all that was gone now. The Elena who had hoped for his affection was long gone. I was a different person now, stronger, more self-sufficient, and far beyond the man who had once been my father. "You should have thought about that before," I said, my voice eerily calm, my words cutting through the tension like a knife. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I had learned that sometimes silence and the weight of a single sentence could carry far more power than any shouting match ever could. He stepped closer, eyes desperate now, his voice a mere whisper. "Elena, please. I don't have anyone else." My gaze never wavered. "That's not my problem," I replied. "You made your choices. You made your bed. Now lie in it." I could see the shock in his eyes, and for the briefest moment, I thought I might see him crumble. Maybe even beg. But I couldn't give in. I had made my peace long ago, and if he wanted redemption, it was no longer mine to offer. There was no satisfaction in it. No joy in seeing him on his knees, broken and pleading. I didn't want to be that person anymore, the one who lived for revenge. But this wasn't about punishment. This was about understanding who I had become and realizing I was no longer his little girl, waiting to be chosen. With one last look, I stood up, my heels clicking against the floor as I walked toward the door. He didn't move. He didn't stop me. I opened the door and walked out. I closed it gently behind me, leaving him standing there with nothing but the consequences of his choices. I thought I would feel something more, relief, perhaps, or triumph. But as I stood there, the echo of my words still hanging in the air, I felt nothing. Nothing, except the hollow ache of years wasted on a man who never truly saw me. The door clicked shut behind me, but I could still hear him in my mind. His voice soft and broken, his hands shaking as he begged. "Please, Elena," he had said, dropping to his knees, desperation seeping through every word. "Please, I need something. Anything. A position. Just a small one. I can't keep going like this. I've lost everything." His words didn't surprise me. They weren't new. It was the same song, the same melody he had sung in one form or another every time things fell apart for him. The only difference now was that I wasn't the daughter who would run to his side to fix things. I wasn't the girl who would silently accept the scraps he threw her way. I had built myself from nothing. I didn't need him anymore. But the sight of him there, the father who had dismissed me, who had betrayed me so completely, brought something else bubbling up inside. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even resentment. It was a quiet, resigned kind of sorrow. A sorrow that someone who was supposed to love me had been so blind to who I was. A sorrow that this man, who had once been my protector, had become a shell of the father I once longed for. Still, I said nothing, because this wasn't about me saving him. It never had been. This was about him realizing that the person he had ignored, the person he had pushed away, was no longer the little girl waiting for his approval. He had lost everything, But I had gained something far more valuable, my peace. And that, I realized, was something I would never give up. "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered to myself as I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me there. I'd expected the confrontation to sting, to feel like some kind of release. I thought that when I finally shut the door behind him, when I finally let go of that last piece of expectation I had been clinging to, I would feel something. Something bigger. Maybe even a little bit of victory. But there was none of that. Instead, there was only a strange, unfamiliar kind of peace. A quiet calm that wrapped around me, cocooning me in the aftermath of everything I had been through. He was gone. And so was the part of me that had ever believed I needed him. I didn't feel angry, not even sad. It was almost as if all the years of waiting for him to see me, the heartache, the betrayals, the false hopes, had finally evaporated, leaving only the quiet hum of a life I had created on my own. It was something I hadn't even known. I needed until now. I'd spent so many years waiting for closure, for him to finally admit the pain he'd caused, for an apology that would never come. But I had learned something in those silent years. Waiting for someone to give you what you deserve doesn't make you whole. It doesn't fix what's broken. You fix it yourself. And that's what I had done. I stood in my office alone, but not lonely. Everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for, was right there in front of me. My company, my success, my independence, they were all mine. And now, the legacy I had always been denied was within my reach. But more than that, I had something even more precious. My own sense of peace. The kind that doesn't come from a job, or money, or power. It comes from knowing you've done the work. You've healed. You've built yourself up despite everything. Wasn't the broken girl who needed him anymore. I was the woman who had outgrown him. And that realization was the truest kind of victory. The daughter he had abandoned was no longer the one he had to worry about. I was the woman he would never have a chance to break. Not now. Not ever again. The power was quiet, but it was there. It settled over me in a way I hadn't expected. The girl who had spent years in the background, the one ignored by her father, the one who had always been second, was now standing at the center of everything. My father had always been the one. With the power, the one with the authority. He was the one who made the rules, who decided who mattered and who didn't. But now, the roles had reversed. I wasn't the girl waiting for him to see me anymore. I wasn't the one standing in the shadows, hoping for recognition. I was the one with everything, and I wasn't afraid to take my place. It wasn't about revenge. I didn't need to make him suffer. He had already done that to himself. His empire was gone. His life a series of failures he had created on his own. And there was no satisfaction in watching him fall. What was satisfying, what was empowering, was knowing that I didn't need him to be anything for me. I had built my life from the ground up, and in the end, I was the one holding the reins. The woman who had once been overlooked, the one who was ignored, was now the woman who made the decisions. The daughter he had dismissed was now the one who controlled the legacy he had stolen from her. I stood tall, not with anger or arrogance, but with the quiet strength that comes from knowing you are finally where you belong. He had broken me once, but that girl no longer existed. The woman standing before him was someone he would never break again. When I walked past him, when I turned my back and left him standing in that office, I didn't feel bitterness. I didn't feel like I had won. I just felt peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you've taken everything that was taken from you, and you've made something new with it. My father would never understand it, but that was okay. I didn't need him to. I didn't need anyone to see me for what I was now. I had built this life, and I was finally in control of my own story. And in that moment, I knew that the daughter he had ignored, the daughter he had failed, was no longer someone he could hurt. I was the woman he would now answer to.